Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Just Bros podcast, where we share physical therapists and engineers' perspective on outdoor life, our field of expertise, and anything Just Bros want to discuss.
And welcome back to the Just Bros podcast. Today we'll be covering our standard topics, including my knee surgery recovery, our fitness journeys, and we actually get to welcome our very first guest to the Just Bros podcast. But first, how's your day, bro?
It was a pretty good day. Standard Tuesday for me. How about yours?
We ended up getting quite a blizzard, so we had to put up with that. Got my foot into a couple water puddles, had to come home and change shoes, that old chestnut. But Hunter, what about you?
Not too bad. I had school pretty much all day, 7:30 to 3. So that was lots of fun. Came home.
That's pretty standard, isn't it?
It really is anymore.
Pretty routine day for you. Well, for our listeners, our very first guest is Hunter Silty. He's a Gillette native and is in physical therapy school up north in North Dakota. And we're excited to have you on the show.
Yeah, I'm excited to be the first guest. It's an honor.
You bet. Well, we're going to go over some topics that you're kind of an expert in. So we're looking forward to covering some things about how to build your arrows for maximum effectiveness on game. And first, I think you guys may have some questions about my knee.
Yeah. How's it going?
Well, I'm able to walk on it, and the more I walk, the better it feels. So I think I'm just going to keep doing that for a few weeks, and then maybe in 3 more weeks, I'll start to actually do a little bit more strengthening. But right now, I'm just doing some small step-ups and some wall sits, a bunch of hip stuff, doing some blood flow restriction training, which I know some people think it's kind of scary, but it's actually got a lot of evidence supporting it with returning some strength back without that high load and demand. I know maybe Hunter's got something for us on that.
Yeah, just, for the non-physical therapy folk out there like myself, what is blood flow restriction training, whatever it is you've called it? One of you want to go into a little detail on that? Hunter, throw you in the spotlight here.
Ooh, so kind of like, I've been exposed a little bit just working with Andrew, and then in school as well. We kind of did a research project with it, and kind of like Andrew said, you're just trying to maximize the benefits you get with exercise without having that excessive load applied to the joint or to the muscle. So it's really good for, knee injuries. When there's restrictions as far as the amount of load that you can apply, you can still kind of get that intensity that allows for the growth and the strength in the muscles there. So we at school actually have these pretty fancy machines that determine how much pressure needs to be done, or determines the occlusion pressure of your blood, and then it backs off a little bit, and then you just pretty much hit a button. It goes to that desired pressure. You do the exercise, shuts off, and yeah, it's pretty slick. And like Andrew said, there's pretty good research as far as the benefits that come of it.
Awesome.
Yeah, it's been a good tool for me, always applying it to patients, but this is really the first time I've had a circumstance where I'm going to benefit from it, hopefully. So hopefully it'll give me a jump start on my recovery when I can start loading it up.
Yeah, absolutely. Get you back in the squat rack.
Have you been hitting the squat rack lately?
Yeah, a little bit. Easing back into it. I can't do what I did last time I was out at Rehab Solutions or
Yeah.
Elite Performance, I guess. But I'll be there again by the time I'm out there this summer. Don't you worry.
Hunter, do you think he has the gym record? I got to think he does.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
It was like 210 pounds or something like that.
Something like that. Yeah.
Well, just so everybody knows, you guys lifted in there daily. So if the gym record was 210, I don't know what that's saying about you too.
No, I can't remember what it was. What was it? What'd you do?
It was in the fours or something. I don't remember.
Yeah,
I ended up going up to about 5 later that year.
I think he did 465 for a couple reps is what I remember.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
Yeah.
I think we ran out of weight.
Toss Andrew on my back. No, I can't squat 700 pounds.
Dang, that hurts.
No, I'm just kidding.
Not 700 pounds, man.
No.
You know, you can't eat dumbbells, right? That's one of my favorite Rocket quotes. But
That's good.
well, Hunter, thanks for joining us, and we're, I kind of told my brother I think it's never too late to be prepared for whatever opportunity is coming ahead, and oftentimes, archery season comes around, and you think of it being September, but you got the archery challenge, and then you want to make sure you're shooting the same arrows, through your practice. So what are some of the 101 beginner level things to consider? And then we'll probably start asking some questions about, how to maximize your arrow setup for taking wild game.
Yeah, so like you said, archery season's never just September to November. For me, it's pretty much all year round, whether it's just tinkering with my bow or with my arrows. I really kind of enjoy that. So disclaimer, I'm no expert by any means. I'd consider myself almost more of just a junkie, I guess. I have no formal training or anything like that, but I've watched hours and hours of YouTube videos. I've read so many articles and stuff. So I feel like I can maybe bring a little bit to the table. So just putting that out there.
I've heard that, you're one of those people that can consistently put arrows on paper at 90 to 100 yards. So I would say you're probably more than qualified to speak on the subject, at least from my viewpoint. My furthest, I shot a deer with my bow this year at about 11 yards. So that's all the further it was. I didn't need to reach out any further. I didn't really practice that much further. So
there's nothing wrong with that at all. So just before we get into like arrow selection or anything like that, the biggest thing I think people need to understand is how an arrow actually flies before deciding like what broadhead they want to use, if they want to use like an insert or any outsert, if they want to go light or heavy. So like I said, I'm not an expert by any means, but I do kind of understand some of the physics behind how the arrow flies. And there's some great YouTube videos out there, especially the Hunting Public has a great video out there. A guy named Ranch Fairy, he's kind of goofy. He's got some good content. And then Daryl Barnett, he's another guy. I think he actually worked for maybe NASA as far as like flying rockets. So the same concepts apply. So I have my little Apple Pencil here. This is the best arrow I have as far as demonstrating today. But John, you'll probably actually really get into this being the engineer. But so an arrow, let's just say this arrow is 30 inches long, right? The center, let's just say the center of gravity, right? Where the balance point is right in the middle, 15 inches, right? So the main contributing factor to how an arrow flies stably is lift, right? So like you're driving down the highway and you like stick your hand out, it's going to want to go like that, right? That's That's lift. So if you split the arrow into two, I'm trying to get it in view here. If you can split the arrow into two different torque equations, so if you have a distance here and a force or a lifting force here, right? You have two of those. So your lifting force here is going to be your broadhead, and then your lifting force back here is going to be your fletching, okay? So the biggest thing to contribute to a stable arrow flight is having the center of gravity be in front of the center of pressure. So the center of pressure is the sum of these two torques, okay? So say you do this force right here times that distance, that's one torque. You do this distance, that force, that's another torque. Okay, add those together. You need that. So if this is center of pressure, you need the center of pressure to be behind the center of gravity. That allows for stable arrow flight. And the next question is like, how do I change those factors? And so a lot of people are starting to understand that, okay, if I load up the front of this arrow, right, that shifts the center of gravity forward, decreases this length. This force is still the same, right? But the overall torque is less than this torque. So by having this torque greater than the one up here, stable arrow flight, okay? So shifting center of gravity up, but also you can shift the center of pressure back, right? So the farther the center of gravity and the center of pressure are apart, the more stable your arrow is going to fly. So by adding maybe like if you're shooting a 3-fletched arrow, maybe shoot 4 fletchings. Or if you're shooting like a smaller, like blazer vane that doesn't have that much surface area, maybe switching to like a longer, taller one with greater surface area. That's going to shift that center of pressure back. If that makes sense. Have I lost you guys at all?
And so,
no, I think the other
safe
thing,
to assume that stable arrow flight isn't just for the people that want to shoot 110 yards with their bow. This is important to anyone shooting a bow, right?
Yep, absolutely. And that kind of leads into the next thing is stable arrow flight will lead to greater accuracy, right? Or let's say like I'm drawn back and I torque the bow, like say I flinch, right? And that can kind of affect the arrow flight. Having the more stable arrow setup, so having the center of gravity and the center of pressure be farther apart, that's just more forgiveness, right? So it's going to allow, so when your arrow comes off the riser, it's going to have that bend no matter what, no matter how stable the arrow is. But by having those 2 points farther apart, it's going to allow the arrow to stabilize much faster, greater accuracy. And in the end, you're going to be more lethal as far as in a hunting situation. Good there. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah. The term I guess that I've heard and I know you've kind of educated me on this this past year is FOC, is front of center. And so that's the term that I think the industry is starting to use, is a high FOC, which just means there's more mass towards the tip of the arrow than the back of towards the fletching. That's what you're talking about. It's giving you more stability. And I think that's we're just scratching the surface on the flight of the arrow. Mm-hmm. You have speed of the arrow, you have the flight of the arrow, you have FOC, you have types of broadheads, you have the thickness of the arrow, you have the length of the arrow, the overall mass of the arrow. There's so many variables. What would you say is like, if I'm going to go buy some arrows, what should I be looking for as far as is spine stiffness? What about the thickness of arrows? I know a lot of people are, speed. We want the Weatherby Magnum cartridges shooting the fastest things out there. But is that really what we need to be lethal, or is there maybe some more important variables?
So like you said, with the spine or the shaft of the arrow, that's going to probably be like the first variable that you can kind of mess around with. And I mean, there's nothing wrong with going into your local archery shop and buying like the pre-made arrows. That's honestly what I do. I know some guys will order the shaft online, want to fletch them. I mean, more power to you. But as far as like selecting an arrow, you really kind of want to decide what you're going to use it for. Like if you're just going to shoot it a couple times here and there before archery season, maybe hunt a couple days here and there, there's no reason to spend $15 on an arrow. But on the other hand, like money's not going to buy you like more kills out in the field. So just selecting the arrow based on like your price range and what you're going to use it for. And a lot of the times it doesn't matter if it's like if you're shooting an Easton brand, gold tip, Victory, Beeman, doesn't matter. A lot of the times you can just go on to their website and you can type in your draw length, the poundage of your bow, and it'll determine the spine that you need. And the spine determines like the stiffness of the arrow. So if, let's say you're shooting a heavy pound bow, but the spine is too weak, that's going to affect arrow flight and can also damage your bow. So as far as like the speed craze, I was there for a while, but the more that I've learned, I kind of like the analogy. Like, would you rather get hit like with a golf ball at say 100 miles an hour or a cannonball at 70 miles an hour? I mean, as far as the damage done.
And I was so I got a new bow. This is a couple years ago. I get a new bow, hanging out with Hunter. I'm shooting. I get a new arrow set up. I just get whatever Rocky Mountain discount Sports is hooking me up with. I don't even know what's going on, honestly. I mean, like, I like the green arrows the best. So I get those, and I got this new bow. It's supposed to be fast. I liked it because it was quiet and smooth in the hand. And we decided to do a chronograph and see, how fast our arrows were going. I'm like, 286. Oh man, Hunter's, 10-year-old bow is shooting faster than mine. He goes, well, dude, that's impressive. That's super impressive. I'm like, well, I'm not shooting it as fast as yours. And so kind of go into why you said that. Why, and now I know, but I liked your explanation for that.
So you're shooting a pretty heavy arrow. You've got a really long draw length. And the overall weight of your arrow is pretty dang heavy. And to be able to reach that speed with that heavier an arrow, that was kind of the thing that kind of impressed me the most.
For the uninitiated, what do you consider fast out of a modern compound bow? Just so they have some frame of reference on what a 290 foot per second arrow is. My
bow was marketed at pushing things past 340 feet per second. And I think that's blazing. But that's not what I'm getting out of it with my arrow setup. And at first I was disappointed that I got screwed on the bow. And Hunter's like, no, dude, that bow is nice. And you're shooting 534 grain arrows at that speed. Got nothing to worry about.
So 300-ish is a decent mark. I mean, that's fast.
I think
for all intents and purposes.
I think what we know is speed is overhyped and may not be that critical, but fast, I think, is 300 plus. There probably is a sweet spot. I don't know what that is. And do you know what that sweet spot is for speed, Hunter?
I mean, it's just going to depend on your preference and like what trajectory you're comfortable with. And I was going to get into this later, but like you said, I kind of agree that the speed craze is kind of overhyped as far as when you actually dig into the science behind arrow flight, kinetic energy, all those things are kind of leaning in favor of a heavier setup. And so as far as like a sweet spot, let's say maybe the farthest shot that you're going to shoot is 30 yards. I feel like there's no reason to try to shoot 280 feet per second, you know? Like if you want to load it up and you feel comfortable with the trajectory of your arrow, knowing that you're only going to shoot 30 yards, by all means. But if you live out west, kind of like we do, where we want to maybe stalk muleys or some goats, and we want to make that 70-yard shot, and we don't want our arrow looping like that, then maybe we dial back the weight of our arrow, or get a new bow like you, Andrew, that can still shoot it at a trajectory that's not like that. If that answers your question, I feel like that is kind of the best way to put it.
So, I mean, the purpose drives your use case drives the equipment that you should be using, basically.
Absolutely. Yep.
So do you have a second set of arrows for elk hunting? Like, do you have a different setup between hunting speed goats and deer versus elk? Or do you just have one setup that works really well with your bow?
Yeah. I think some guys maybe have different setups. I like to just roll with one setup. I'll shoot it all summer at all the tack events, shoot in my backyard, just so I know what that arrow is going to do. And I know it's going to perform on a little speed goat or a bull elk. And it just keeps things pretty consistent. There's not a lot of variable there.
Yeah.
I did both last year, just so you fellows know. I did poke a goat with my bow in August, and I got my first archery bull with my bow. I used the same arrows, and I used actually I used a cheaper broadhead on the antelope. Not gonna lie, but I after the antelope season had a few weeks to practice with a different broadhead, same weight and everything, but it did. I don't think it changed much of my flight at all, but I definitely wanted to practice with and make sure there's no changes beforehand.
Cool. Is there a reason you switched broadheads?
Yeah, Hunter. He's got me always second guessing with the gear I have and making me think I need to go big or go home. So I ended up going. And actually, his brother was probably the first one that got to see the box of broadheads that I had in at the time. They're Iron Wills out of North Dakota, and they're a single bevel broadhead, which has its own mechanical advantage when it comes into contact with bone. And there's some interesting things to talk about there too. I don't know if that's on our experts list of topics, but I'm certainly just going with whatever he says. So whatever he says, I go, yeah, I better try that out.
Well, it clearly did the trick, obviously paired with your practice, because your bull ran, what'd you say, 50, 60 yards?
It was no further
80
than
yards?
80. No further than 80, but I'm assuming less than that. Because I'm not really sure how far my shot really was. I think I pinned him at 30 or 40 and let it fly. I was very interested to see what I hit because he died so fast. And there was a component of bone in the shoulder blade that I did break through. Not center mass shoulder blade, but for us PTs is on the supraspinatus fossa, and I got it sliced into a couple fragments, and yet it did the trick. So I don't know if it, you hope that extra $45 broadhead for one broadhead, by the way, did the trick, and I think it couldn't have hurt. So,
Yeah.
but let's see
All
what the expert has to say about broadhead selection.
Yeah.
He's
So,
the expert from Racks and Rods, by the way.
I'll drop
Gotta
his
throw that
Instagram
out.
handle in our comments or whatever here. Just y'all go give him a follow. Some good stuff.
Yeah. Go give us a follow on Racks and Rods. We need some love over there. So just kind of working our way down from selecting a spine or a shaft. Probably the next biggest component is the broadhead, right? And we kind of talked about shifting that center of gravity forward, and you can do that by shooting just a bigger broadhead, or some arrow manufacturers will make inserts. So an insert pretty much goes in to the bottom of your arrow, and it has a threaded component to where the broadhead, which would be the male portion, just twists in, and that also provides more of that shifting of the center of mass forward. So just kind of bringing it a full circle there. So for the longest time, I always shot a mechanical broadhead because I fell for the ads on Outdoor Channel of the cutting diameters that's that big.
The rage.
Yep, that's exactly what I shot for
Chopping
many
turkeys'
years.
necks off.
Yep, and I mean, I didn't know any better in high school. I wasn't
Yeah.
as educated as I am now, and I killed with them. But I shot them, one, because I thought they were cool. Two, it was the best. I could get the best flight out of the mechanical broadheads. Anytime I put on a fixed blade, my arrow flight would just go crazy. And I didn't know any better. I was just like, oh, I can't shoot that. My bow doesn't shoot it well. That's what I would tell myself. So that was another portion. But now that I understand arrow flight and stuff like that, I've got everything kind of sorted out. But I do think that a fixed blade is the way to go. And I know that some people out there have shot mechanicals forever. They're going to die on the mechanical hill. Like, if it works for you, by all means, go for it. But I really think that with the correct arrow setup and having a solid point, super sharp, there's not any chance that it's not going to deploy. It's going to be the best option as far as how lethal it is and how ethical it is to some degree. And it's going to provide that sense of forgiveness as well. So we all want to shoot an animal when it's perfectly broadside, right? Front shoulder forward, 20 yards. At that point, you could probably shoot it with a field tip and hit it in the heart and it's going to die, right? But how many times does that ever happen? Not very often.
Not very often.
So by having a fixed blade, especially like a single bevel or just a broadhead that's made out of a sturdier material, I'm not promoting non-broadside or non-ethical shots, but if push comes to shove, and let's say, like Andrew's case, that bull elk is 30 yards away, 25 yards away, frontal, you might have a little more confidence with maybe trying to tuck it right in there. Whereas with a mechanical, the forgiveness and the overall effectiveness is going to decrease immensely. So,
And I guess from my perspective, my point of view on mechanicals, and I've never shot them, but it just seems like you're in situations where you want to decrease your odds of failures, and using a mechanical increases areas that can fail versus, a fixed blade broadhead. You've got the pivot point that could break. You've got the fact that it just might not open if you hit something and don't get enough leverage there. So you unnecessarily introduce failure points into your setup. That's my perspective on it.
In physical therapy, we call it degrees of freedom. So if you have someone they want to do an inclined bench press on a Bosu ball while doing, there's lots of variables there versus something more stationary. Another simpler version would be sitting versus standing. You got more joints involved. And so if you have less moving parts, it's a little more predictable, and like you said, fail-proof to some extent. So I think I always thought the idea of a mechanical was awesome, but I went with the old 3-blade Montec G5 Montec, and that's what I shot my antelope with. I don't know if I'll ever change. I honestly, I'd love to be sponsored by Iron Will for how much I've been talking about them, but because they're sweet looking broadheads, and I do think there's reasons to try a single bevel versus a double bevel, but anyways, I think if you can put more chips in your basket that are a more sure thing, I think that you should try to do that.
So aside from mechanical bad, fixed blade good, single versus double bevel, what do you got for us?
So like Andrew said, from a physics standpoint, the single bevel does provide a source of mechanical advantage on its own. And that's like a whole different conversation that I'm not sure I'm qualified to talk about. But
can I shed just a wee bit of light on single versus double bevel?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. The single bevel versus the double bevel. The double bevel would be like a knife with a bevel on each side. A single bevel would be like if a knife only had the bevel on the one side. Those bevels can basically direct force. So if you have a double bevel, you've got equal force from both sides. And if you have a single bevel, you have differential force with force on that single bevel creating rotation. That's my understanding. Yeah.
Which creates you continue that, and you have to buy the right side. The bevel has to be on the correct side to match your fletching and the spin of your arrow. So you're actually going to continue that rotational stability that you get with the slight twist in your fletching that is going to continue through the flesh. And I think that having that not only steered by the rudder or in the back by the fletching, but having it in the broadhead too, creates less flex, creates less, hopefully a sharper, smoother cut, and still has that rotational damage that we're looking for. I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but that's the idea.
Yeah, as how, like, that's how I interpret it. And I'm not saying single bevel or nothing. I think just more so, and I'm not saying you got to go buy the most expensive broadhead out there either, but I think maybe shying away from the mechanicals and easing towards the fixed blade, made of a solid material, is definitely the way to go. And then another huge component that not a lot of people talk about, and I don't know why it gets neglected, but just the sharpness of the broadhead as well. Like, sometimes you can go and buy broadheads and touch the blades and it doesn't cut you, right? So expecting that to cut maybe through the heart or the lungs or an artery, it's kind of, it doesn't really make sense.
First, it's got to go through their hair and then their dermis layer, and it's got to get through that hide that's just very robust, right? And then you get into all this stuff, potentially bone, organs, and so you got a lot of work to do before you even get to those organs. But
yeah, I mean, it's knives need sharpened with use, and I've gotten some, like you said, straight out of the box, a knife at least that needed sharpened straight out of the box. I sharpened it and it cut great, but you've got to assume that the same thing happens with broadheads. They're not all going to come razor sharp. That doesn't mean they can't be razor sharp. They just aren't at the time.
Yeah, absolutely. And like Andrew was saying, let's say it's halfway sharp, and it gets through the hide. It gets through the mud, the rocks that's stuck in the hide, maybe clips a rib. And by the time it gets to the arteries and the other vasculature, it's dull. I mean, the odds are kind of stacked against you. And this kind of sounds a little maybe gruesome, but just like in cadaver labs, seeing a human artery and how maybe they have like a musculature to them to some degree. It's not like they're put on tension and they're very thin, and like if you barely touch them, they're going to blow up. That's not the case. They are fragile, but they're flexible to some degree, and having a quality blade that when it does come in contact, that's going to cut that is huge. And I think that's kind of cool as far as applying my PT education to the world of hunting, understanding like how the vasculature is actually made and stuff like that makes a pretty big difference.
Absolutely.
So if you had to choose double versus single bevel, you would choose...
Well, right now I'm actually running a double. I'm shooting the Magnus Stingers. Only had one kill with them this year, and complete pass through. And kind of circling back to the advantage of the heavier arrow and the broadhead is you, as far as like a track job, you want that complete pass through, right? You want the damage that you've done on the inside. You want that blood to come out on both sides, right? You want the highest recovery odds.
The number one thing you're told in emergency response or in the ER or out in the wilderness is if you have a puncture, do not remove the object. And that's because it's clogging the hole. It's allowing your body to clot, and it's allowing things to not have a gaping hole in them. So you're almost plugging the leak. And so a lot of people who end up losing game, I believe, it's because they don't have a good pass-through shot. And that's not always possible on big game, but on an antelope, we've seen it. I know it's documented on YouTube with John Nielsen smoking one at the pond at 30 yards.
Thanks to Rex and Rods on that one.
One of Kaysen's all-time favorite YouTube videos. We have to watch it all the time. But no, I think it is. If you apply that concept from our healthcare and you apply it to the field, I think it's you do want a clean pass-through shot where you've popped the lungs, you've sliced some blood vessels, and then the damage is done, and it's not being protected by that arrow.
So to answer your question, John, at this point, I think they're probably the same.
Yeah, it works.
You got me to buy those expensive broadheads for nothing.
Well, after
he
seeing
wanted you
what
to try
they do
them
to
out and see if
Ebola,
he needed to see if they were living up to the hype before he spent the money.
Exactly.
I mean, I'm not aiming for bone by any means, but it's cool, and it's supporting a small business too that I think is neat too. But so cut it to me straight. Racks and Rods, 307, Hunter Silty here. Give me all the specs on your arrows that you have created it's your new setup. Because I'm sure there's a lot of people that are going to go, I'm just going to copycat this guy because he knows his stuff.
It's a starting point. I mean,
yeah, it's a great starting point.
Yeah, like I said, I'm no expert. I could just consider myself a junkie, and I really like to just mess around with different variables. So, I mean, I've shot X, Y, Z, different spines, different broadheads. This last summer, so I've consistently actually shot the Easton Access 5mm. They perform well for me, and I like them. I did switch spines. I'm now shooting the 300 spine. I have the 50 grain brass insert up front, just a standard fletch in the back. Like I said,
Blazers.
nothing wrong. Yep, Blazers. They run about 4 grains per fletch, 4 to 6 grains per fletch. And then I have the Iron Will 25 grain collars up front. So it's pretty much, a collar. You might just have to Google it. Otherwise, I don't know if I can explain it too well. Adds a little more weight up front and also kind of gives you protection up front as far as, say you like hit a tree or something. It won't snap the end of your air off. And then I have the 125 grain Magnus Stingers. So
what's your arrow weigh?
I think I was pushing 550.
That's pretty good. And then what did you do a chrono after that? That change?
I've not shot it through a chrono yet, but I do know that it is shooting much slower based off of my sight tape.
Oh, okay.
Because I was shooting, I think I was barely 420 grains maybe before, and my sight tape was, I think it said 280, something like that. And pin gapping was pretty even, had good trajectory. And then once I switched, I saw a big difference as far as trajectory goes. And like I said, this might be another thing where maybe I back down a little bit because I wasn't too happy at 60 yards getting the lob. But that's kind of what I'm running with right now.
So I guess there's another aspect to archery that we haven't covered, and maybe you could touch on quick. But when you say sight tape, what do you mean? I know what you mean, but just, describe for those that don't know what you mean when you say your sight tape.
So I think all three of us are shooting the same sight now. But a sight tape is essentially used for a sight that is able to slide up and down. So my sight, for example, has 5 pins that are fixed. But I do have the option to where I can grab a wheel on the side and it moves my whole sight up and down. And my very bottom pin is going to be the distance shown on my sight tape. So let's say I roll my dial up to 80 yards and there's a little arrow that shows right on that sight tape, 80 yards. I know that my bottom pin is going to be dialed in for 80 yards. And would I ever shoot anything at 80 yards? Probably not, but it's fun to practice with, fun for total archery challenges, but just kind of gives you that ability to shoot farther and feel pretty confident about it.
I don't shoot my bow near as much as I should.
I was going to say, I got to make a point here soon too.
I did do it quite a bit before I came out to go antelope hunting with you guys, and having that black gold sight that you could dial. In the past, I had probably a 5-pin sight, probably 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 yards. And I never would have shot past 60 yards because I didn't have a pin. Whereas being able to dial, I could shoot to 80 or 90 yards. I didn't usually go out to 100 because it's a long ways to walk. But, shooting at a public range with people, it's not, you got to wait for people to be done, and then they're annoyed that you're walking all the way down there. But I felt a lot more confident at shooting at 40, 50 yards because I was getting practice out to 80, 90 yards. Whereas I wouldn't have been able to get that practice before without one of these, I call them modern sights. I don't know how long they've been around, but it seems like they've gotten a lot more popular in the last 7-8 years.
Yeah, they're the go-to site for sure. I think it allows you to have fun at those challenges, those tacks, and then also practice out. just like your rifle, you practice out to 400, it makes a 100-yard shot a chip shot. So you can really exaggerate your misses at those distances. But I want to make a quick little point here. So we just went through what Rex and Rod's 307 Hunter Silty's arrow setup would be. John, can you tell us the details like he did about your arrows?
No, I cannot.
And that's my point.
can-
So the point is that I wanted to make was, if you practice with what you got, you killed a goat this fall, right, Hunter, and you shot and you know all those details. And John, you don't know all those details, but you still practiced and pulled off an ethical shot. So it really just matters that you got to practice. You got to practice with what you have. And if you're interested in updating your equipment and your gear, these are all things you should consider. And these are kind of the things that are maybe going to give you a little bit more of an advantage. The more you know, you know.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, I guess it also plays into if you are practicing and you're not shooting as good as you think you should be, one of those things you could potentially look at is arrow stability. Yep.
Yeah.
Is
Absolutely.
there, other than just knowing your crack shot and your arrows aren't flying true, like Captain America over here, is there a test you can do, or how do you know you've got stable flight?
This brings up a great point that I don't think I talked about. You can, no matter the arrow setup, you cannot out arrow setup an untuned bow. So before you even worry about your arrow setup, make sure your bow is properly tuned. And you can do that by paper tuning, and that paper tuning will show kind of the flight of your arrow. You're looking for very true, like bullet hole through the paper, and that's one test, I guess, to determine the flight of your arrow. And then just watching it too. I mean, 280, 250 feet per second is fast, but the human eye can actually pick up the flight of it alone, and I think that's probably just the best test. Just if your arrow is flying a little
especially
goofy.
outside with the sun reflection at a 40 to 50 yard distance, you're able to pick it up, I think.
Oh, I mean, as an example, I shoot my 22 sometimes. I'll go out to the 100-yard range, and I can see that lead slug flying through my rifle scope. After it gets about 50, 60 yards out there, you can see it, and that's traveling about 1,000 feet per second when it leaves the barrel, and is much smaller than an arrow. So
Yeah.
I agree. You should be able to look and see, does my arrow look like it's stable, or is it a little too wobbly?
It's pretty interesting, I gotta say. What would be, maybe, Hunter, we're gonna put you on the spot here. What's the most interesting thing that you've learned this past week?
Ooh. I've probably learned a lot this past week.
I hope so.
So
Paying for it.
yeah, paying way too much for it. One statistic that kind of stood out to me was the most common cause of traumatic brain injury is falls. So I would have put money that it would be like motor vehicle accidents or something of that sort, but it's actually falls. So kind of makes sense as far as old people and young people.
Well, Ryan
In your
always
head.
said falls are a 4-letter F word
Yeah, exactly.
without the S. But
Yeah.
it's a 5-letter F word. But
Yeah. You got an interesting fact there, Andrew?
I learned the answer to a question one of my longtime friends asked me. It turns out that a blind man does fart in the dark.
Always.
Yeah.
It's interesting. Who told you that?
That'd be Rob Keeney. Yeah.
Oh, that sounds like something Rob
I
would
don't
know.
know if he even I don't even know if he knows what a podcast is, but maybe someday he'll get around to listening to it.
That's funny.
What's the most interesting thing you've learned this last week?
Well, I thought I'd look something up since we were going to be talking about archery today. And interesting thing there for me, at least, is the oldest. I'll let you guys guess first. How old do you think the oldest archery artifact that we know about is? Any idea how old you think that is? 64,000 years.
Jeez.
From South Africa.
Before the wheel, probably.
A stone arrow point was found in a cave in South Africa. And it's dated to be about 64,000 years old. So we've been trying to perfect this for a long time.
Was it a single bevel or a double bevel?
Didn't say. Oh, yeah.
Okay.
It probably had more than 2 bevels. I mean,
yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, it's cool. It's and that's the thing I think that people kind of lose sight of is the Native Americans didn't have chronographs. They weren't shooting as fast as we're shooting. They didn't have roll pins, and they were lethal. They were absolutely able to take stuff. And so I think if you're able to put it on target and you have a sharp object, moving at a decent speed, you can get through the tissue. That's what matters, and you got to be confident in it. So.
Yeah, and I really think that at the end of the day, no matter how much you put into building an arrow, the best arrow is a well-placed arrow. And it's that plain and simple. You can have the most expensive broadhead, you can have this or that, but the best arrow is a well-placed arrow. So
I agree.
Yeah. Well, that was some excellent information, Hunter. Thanks for being our number one supporter at Just Bros and coming on and giving us some and our listeners some valuable information for this coming season of practice and hopefully this fall, getting the job done. If there's any other people that are interested in some conversations to have with us, we'd love to entertain them and hopefully get somebody on that'll answer those questions. Hunter, you did an excellent job. I'm sure we got some more questions you're highly qualified to answer.
Definitely.
But we'll kind of work ourselves around. There may be a time too to kind of talk a little bit more about your PT school process and kind of some of those things that you're learning that's new. I'd love to catch up on some of those things with you too sometime. But be sure to give Racks and Rods a follow on Instagram, and they got lots of awesome stuff going on there, especially during fishing and hunting season. What else we got, John? Any Husker football news out of Lincoln?
No, the only thing I saw recently was Adrian Martinez got drafted to the USFL by ex-head coach Mike Riley.
No way.
It's not, I mean, it's news. I don't know. Not like exciting or anything.
I liked him.
Can you even watch?
Hunter came on to the Husker fan page, is in the absolute trough of the Huskers. Their glory, but hey, it can only go up from here, right?
I think
I'm going to be honest. I've been a part of probably 5 Husker football roller coasters, and it seems like it starts the same all summer long, shooting the bows. I'm hearing about the recruits. I'm hearing about Scott Frost. I'm hearing about this. And last summer, we walked on the way to the golf course. We went through the whole schedule. Northwestern, or maybe this was 2 years ago. Northwestern.
It was last year.
This was last year.
XYZ.
I'm like, we could start out 6-0, man. We really could.
We could have.
We haven't won 6 games in 2 years combined. So,
And
yeah.
the result seems to be the same, but you never know.
I've drank the Roulade, as Andrew says.
Yep. Yep. I'm going to start a t-shirt company as soon as we get our number one recruit. It's going to buy my hunting land for me probably, but yeah.
That would be great.
As far as I know, there's no big news going on, just a lot of training, a lot of conditioning and a lot of hard work, which is always good for a hype video or something, but really no news and no injuries. So that's good. I think the most important thing to consider is this quarterback competition. I think if Casey Thompson can participate in spring ball, it'd be the best thing for the program. I don't know if he'll be back in time with his labrum repair, but it sounds like there's a chance that he'll be able to at least take some snaps and do some of the footwork and maybe some smaller throws for the program. And I think when you have your leaders of your team competing, I think it brings everybody up. So I hope that that's the case. But that's about all I have for Husker football. I think we can call this a success tonight, boys, and we'll have another episode coming out next week.
Yeah, thanks again, Hunter, for hopping on, and be sure to do it again.
Heck yeah! Thanks for having me. That was fun.
All right. Well, I'll talk to you boys later.
All right.